Hi, everyone who's joining in. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I'll take off my mask because not many people are around me at the moment. Hi. People are slowly entering. Really looking forward to this evening or morning or afternoon, wherever you are, but it's evening here in Kampala. And we are delighted to welcome you to our webinar. It's a Local Talks Artachat collaboration. Local Talks is the discussion series that's hosted by Localworks, and it is a talks program on green design. And Artachat is the discussion series hosted by 32 Degrees East, and it is a discussion program on contemporary art and social issues. And so we thought, let's combine forces to bring together our amazing audiences of artists, architects, designers, engineers, and get to share all about our really exciting project. So thank you so much for signing in. We're just gonna give it a few minutes as people slowly join online. We already have 15 attendees, which is really great. Seeing a lot of familiar names. So thank you so much to all of you who responded to our invitation to join, and to those of you who I have not met before. I'm Teesa Bahana, Director of 32 Degrees East, and one of the hosts for today's Local Talks Artachat extravaganza. So I'm kind of stalling right now, but we're getting there. We're getting there. James is a team person online. So yeah, I guess when you're ready, are you ready, James?
I think we're going to be ready in about 2 minutes.
Okay, so we'll be ready in 2 minutes. He's just run off now to get sorted with a few things. It's fun. It's a lot of technical supports, and we've got a few cameras set up. So we're looking forward to seeing how this goes. So far, okay, I think. If our sound cuts out or anything like that, please just write that in the chat. Oh, we have I think, a hand up. I don't know, Adriano, if you had the question or if that was by accident. Um, let's see, was it by accident? I've said allowed to talk, so if you do have something you wanted to say, please feel free to say it. Otherwise, I'll take that raised hand to be by accident. So, did you want to say something, or you could? Okay, I think we're okay then. But otherwise, I think if you do, oh, okay, great. Hi, Adriana. Yeah, if you do end up having any questions throughout the site tour, it's great. We have people here in person who'll be asking questions. I think for sound purposes, I'll try repeat the questions to you on the mic, just so you can also hear what's being asked. And then James Musasisi is here on behalf of Localworks. He's one of the architects on the project who will be leading the tour. So yeah, please just put your questions in the chat. I think we'll respond to them throughout the tour. If they're specific to a certain location at the moment of the tour, then I think James can respond to them in time when he sees them. Bear with us as well, because it's a lot of juggling, technology, in person, hybrid events. But we are so glad you're here on this journey with us. Really great to see just the range of people who are joining us. So I think, James, are we good? Are we good to get started?
Yes, we are.
Okay, so yeah, let's see how this goes. It's going to be a nice in-person, offline, online thing. So I'm going to welcome everyone who's physically here, and you can also see a little bit of the crowd we have gathered. And then we'll get started. So, so cool. We have people from Ghana. Great, welcome. All right. So should I? Okay. I think I need someone to. Yeah. Okay.
All right, hello everyone. We're about to start. We're going to hear a word from Teesa, after which I'll begin.
Hi, everyone. We have a hybrid thing happening. So I am online and here in real time here at 32 degrees East in Kabalagala. So glad to see you all here. So many familiar faces, so many new faces. We have people here from all over the world too, which is like really cool. And I think speaks to the intentions of the project. So it's really nice to see it actually coming alive in this way. So again, I'm Teesa Bahana. I'm the director here at 32 Degrees East, and one half of your hosts for today. So we are so glad to be hosting this in collaboration with contractors, Localworks, as part of their Localtalks series, which is on green design. And it's also an Artachat, which is 32 Degrees East series on contemporary art and social issues. And so we're combining forces to just like blow your minds this evening. So thank you so much for joining us. James is going to start us off with a tour of the site. Some of you have come and been a part of my tours, and half of the time I maybe, editorialize a little bit because I am not professional in this respect. So now we actually have James, who is a design architect on the project. And we also have Edson Agume, who is one of the engineers on the project. So really, like, you can get as technical as you would like because they will actually know the answers and will not just say, I'll get back to you, which is what I usually do. So without further ado, I will hand over to James. Thank you so much to everyone online. Thank you to those of you here. Really looking forward to the evening. As we go, feel free to ask questions and let's get started.
Right. Hello, everyone. As earlier mentioned, I'm James Musasizi, and I'm a graduate architect working with Studio FH Architects. That's part of Localworks, which is a design and build collaborative. So I'm going to be leading the site tour in particular. I thought we should start from here, which is the sample wall. Usually on a project like this, many of the technologies that we are using are a bit unconventional in this particular context. So we needed to test out most of those technologies. And we decided to build a full-scale model on site, trying out the different technologies, learning lessons along the way. So as you may rightly see, there are certain things that over the course of this trying out and learning that we have actually perfected on the actual building, as you will see. So since it's a kind of hybrid thing, for those that have questions that are more artistically inclined, you may ask, and those who may want to understand the technical aspects of, say, the rammed earth or the stone masonry, why we have these clay drips sticking out, or the textured brick, how the roof, why are we even using a wooden shingle roof? All those are the questions we are hoping to engage with, among many others. But basically, I think we can move around the sample wall so that you try to get a closer look at some of the things we are putting together, and possibly that could trigger in you some questions to ask. So by and large, what we try to do as a practice is using materials that are locally available, because we believe in trying to build the local economy, trying to build on the craftsmanship that's already found in the local context. So part of that was also using earth. You notice there's so many variations of earth in this project. We have rammed earth, we have compressed earth blocks, we have clay tiles. So there's a lot of earth going on, and maybe James Hampton will talk more about how that conversation of earth began. So when you're using earth in different kinds of usage, you have to be, the way a rammed earth wall works as opposed to solid masonry in compressed earth blocks is a bit different. So it calls for a level of detailing. You notice there's a lot of chamfers going on in the rammed earth, and one would ask why. They are not just a design feature, but usually the corners of the rammed earth are the ones that are most prone to chipping. So when you provide a chamfer, you're cognizant of the fact that that will happen. So you're trying to design with those things in mind. Also, the compressed earth blocks are a thing that we create from the site. We'll be seeing the production shed in a moment. And basically, we've used the earth that we found on this very site, which still speaks to our whole design philosophy and our way of working, that we try to work with what's there in the most sustainable and sensitive way possible. Yeah, so we can continue moving around. You notice the shutters are made in wood. That's eucalyptus wood, and eucalyptus is one of those kinds of wood that you can find more on the market, but we've also found a balance in which we can actually design for it to perform quite well. So we are quite keen on that aspect as well. What you see here are the plaster samples. Within the project, we have, maybe I should talk about the program of the project. This is an art center, and it means you have studios, you have a gallery in the second phase of it. You have a cafe area. So the areas that are going to be plastered are mostly the studios. And this was a process of back and forth, trying out the different proportions of the earthen pigments as well as the lime to try and get the kind of color that we were going for. So still everything is within the palette of earthen tones. So we tried out quite a number, and I think we chose the one that's on this other side of the wall. So we tried to have that process of back and forth, and throughout that process, the client was actively involved, because at the end of the day, they have the final say. So we try all these things out, and along the way, we and the client are both learning, but it's also like a co-design kind of process. So we believe in that collaboration, both in the design, but also in the implementation of it. So yeah, I guess that's it for now. I could also talk about the roof briefly. So you notice we're using papyrus as the ceiling. And what was quite interesting about this project is you notice that you're having a textured CEB wall terminating, like the ceiling literally goes through. So how you treat that junction where you're stopping the bricks short was something that we really needed to get right. And on the actual project, I think it's going to look much better than what it does now. So we've sort of found a way that you stop it ever just slightly short, so that you do not have these materials literally banging into each other. That's what usually causes edges that are not finite.
We have two questions from the chat. I don't know if I missed it. How is the plaster made?
Okay. I guess Edson could say something to that effect.
The plaster is made of lime as a binder. We have some clay and natural pigments from the quarry. And we have sand as the structure of the plaster. And the reason we do that is we want to maintain the openness of the wall. So that's why we try to avoid the cement, because cement kind of seals the walls, and it kind of doesn't help the wall to remain healthy. If you retain the moisture in, you need to get the moisture out as much as you can. But I guess that also improves the quality of air in the space.
Okay. Have a few more questions. Hi guys, the wall looks great. I'm very curious about the composition of soil, clay, and sand used in the rammed earth wall. Were you able to measure these? Also, what challenges did you face when working with rammed earth, and how have you solved them? And then another question, where is the quarry for the earth? Is it local?
Okay, so I think on the composition of the rammed earth, Edson could speak about that, and I think the lessons learned, those we can both talk about.
Yeah, the rammed earth is actually made of the soil we excavated from the foundations, but we also extracted some more soil because that wasn't enough. It's quite a massive wall. We also extracted some more soil from what would be the courtyard, where we are going to put vegetable soil, the plant to be used as planting media. Then there is a bit of sand. There is also a lot of local hand crush aggregate.
If you can speak up, they can hear.
Yeah. The proportion of this was determined from samples. We did a lot of samples during the design. We also did more samples at the beginning of the construction. There's also binder. There's actually some cement and lime. It's about, in percentage terms, it's probably about 7%, I think 6% of cement and half of that as lime. And the reason we're using lime here, much as we are designing the wall to erode over time, but we also want to control that because the lime in a way helps the soil from, keeps it from erosion, because when the wall gets wet, it becomes a bit soft, so it can easily erode. So the lime kind of helps with that stability. Yeah.
Right. And for the lessons learned, I think one of the things that we learned at the very start was if we can sort of zoom in into things like this, what was causing that change was you always have to get your checking right. Edson's team did a wonderful job at designing the formwork, because when you're setting up around that wall, it's like you're building in concrete. Like you have formwork, you have shattering and all these things. But if at all there's any movement, this is going to happen. And at some places, more movement can happen. Other times it's less. Either you're going in or you're going out. It's a natural material, and in that sense, sometimes it's prone to those minor changes. So one of the things you need to get right is the checking that all the shattering is right. If it needs measuring to a laser meter to make sure that all the things are properly spaced. But even during the ramming of the earth, sometimes things begin to move ever so slightly. So it matters that you go in, do a double checking if need demands it. But that was one. The other was about these chamfers. Now, what creates the chamfer is within your formwork, you have to create these wooden pieces that sort of create the form against which this earth is going to be formed. So sometimes either the wood has a tendency, as you'll see in the project, that ever so slightly the chamfer will either bend, or there are those minor things that still go back to checking and also making sure that the carpenters have done what they ought to do. So yeah, that's. I don't know if there's something that.
Well, there are a lot of challenges actually, but most of them are really around keeping the formwork stable. We are using a hammer, a pneumatic hammer, which is connected to compressed air, and it has so much pressure that if your formwork is not designed well, it will just break it apart. There was also a question about the source of the dye. There's a quarry that from our previous project where we're getting the stone from, even where we get the stone that we're using from. So the waste from that quarry is what we use as a pigment for the plaster.
You have a question?
A question. It's about color. So, like, is there a special way you try to manage consistency of color, or do you just leave it up to the sourcing of, where the quarry, wherever it comes from? Is that by surprise, or because I can see, it's very consistent in the lower part, and then there's a bit of like more grayish. Is that wanted? Is there a level of where you say, this is appreciated, but then it gets too much that you add like pigments or something? How do you deal with that?
For this particular, there was a thing that the design architect was going for, but he was also cognizant of the fact that every site may have slight variations to the color of that soil. And I think it was a decision that was made unanimously that we need to stay true to the soil, whether it's more brown or it's more red, we go with what's there, but maybe someone could add to it.
We're not adding dye to the wall. It's just a plastic pigment, but the wall is I mean, the way the materials we mix, so you see the sand, the soil extracted from here, the aggregate is also almost, but anyway, the aggregate will never be visible. So whatever color that gives us is what we move with.
We have another question about the dimensioning of the rammed earth walling, but I don't know if you want to move and then you can answer. Yeah.
I guess we could move, but just before we go, just to make sure we've covered everything on this wall. One other thing we hadn't talked about is this plinth that you sort of see everywhere. The rammed earth never sits directly on the ground. And that's important because stone works better in that application. I think it's Edson who talks about the character of how stone allows, this stone in particular, I believe it's sandstone. It's porous and it allows for moisture to freely move from one end to the other. It allows water to run off, but it allows for moisture to move freely through the material, that you won't get water-related deformation or things like that. So we have a stone plinth, as you'll see even in the project, to try and make sure that the earth is always protected from the elements, and also even the roof to sort of cover the earth that's in wide exposure to the elements. I think I wanted for us to look at the roof just briefly because it's made of wood and maybe people may have questions there as well.
Definitely.
Yeah, maybe we. Yes, so much care was put into the initial detail of it because we drew up the details, but we had to make mock-ups in our personal workspace to try and make sure that we are getting the lapping of the different shingles right, and also making sure that we test it, that will this actually work? Will the water run off properly? So maybe Edson can talk about the detailing of it, but yeah.
Well, it's actually not detailing because we basically have just we have an underlay. In normal shingle roofs, maybe you may not have to have an underlay, but we expect some water to actually go through. So the roof, the timber is more really for visual and insulation purposes. So we just have, well, of course, if you wanted the way, to the color.
Maybe another thing that's interesting, Felix just wrote in the chat. The wood we use,
yes.
so in terms of recycling material, I think that's kind of cool. And kind of in how knowing that it would then go into the roof. So
there's a lot of formwork you use for rammed earth, and it would be a shame if we just threw it away, reusing that as part of the roof covering.
How long did it last, say, as wood, a wooden roof?
Well, I honestly don't know, but but we are following all the detailing methods in such a way that there shouldn't be much of the moisture damage. We did a lot of samples with different kinds of wood, and we actually zeroed in with these eucalyptus panels because they don't absorb as much. Water runs off very quickly. So after the rain, they dry out very quickly. There's air flowing from underneath. So in that way, we are going to limit the amount of rotting that's going to happen. We also try to, lift the roof to a certain angle that will allow for the runoff. Will allow for the water to run off much faster. But at the end of the day, it's really more like a grass roof, a papyrus roof. There's a level of degradation that you have to accept. Yeah.
You don't worry that the tree stump will get any thicker than that.
This is a sample. We're
Okay.
removing it. We don't want to destroy the trees because of the sample.
Okay, we have a few more questions, so maybe as we're walking, we can try answer them if you want to hear too. So from Lawrence Okot, very good work by your team. Thanks for sharing. Question, how do you deal with ventilation? Is it just the spacing above the wall? Because I noticed that the window is completely closed without vents.
So what we've done is it's not well captured on the sample wall because we actually have a breeze wall above all these studios, above every room that we are going to do these interlocking CEBs while leaving hit and miss gaps. So we are actually aware that we need to allow for cross ventilation, and it's already been captured within the design. We haven't yet reached that level yet in the construction. So that's why still you can't see it here, but it's been accounted for as far as design goes.
Okay, we can walk and talk. We have another question. Hi, everyone. I followed the work on the Children's Hospital in Entebbe, where Localworks was also involved in the rammed earth construction. I am curious as to why that particular construction required a lot more stabilization than this job. Both areas aren't too far away from the lake, so is the soil very different? Did you guys hear? Okay.
Yeah, of course, the design requirements were different. The Entebbe Hospital was it had 2 levels. It supports partially it supports a floor. These walls are 7 meters tall, which is different from ours. And then also basically the structural requirements were very different. Here we are looking at 7 megapascals. In Entebbe we are looking at 20. So yeah.
Okay, and sorry, I also forgot, there was an earlier question from Natalie. What is the dimensioning of the rammed earth walling and how are fittings connected? Bolts, etc.?
I think I haven't understood the part of the fittings. Which fittings? Okay, so
how are fittings connected? I don't know. Natalie, do you want to clarify what you mean as James tries to answer?
maybe she means like connecting power and all these things. I don't
She mentions bolts, so.
Bolts, yeah.
Now you can screw into the wall if you really want it much as not desired, because earth is quite brittle. It's not like concrete, so you want to really avoid what you put in there. But I mean, it can receive a plug like any other wall. Yeah. The services can run through, but we have avoided that complication since we have other areas where we could run the services. So most of the services, as you can see, those pipes, they are running in the CB walls, and the transfer is done through the concrete ring beam. So it's just a complication of compacting around services and stuff. We didn't want to go into that.
Okay.
I think she asked about dimensioning as well.
Yes.
Well, technically you need a channel where someone can work, right? On top of the structural requirements of the wall, you actually need something wide enough for people to work. Maybe you can then work backwards and see what is the critical thing. The critical here was actually this space is quite tall, and the dimensions of the wall. I mean, we are still going. How many?
I think about 1.5 to achieve the total 3. It's going to be 3 meters.
But then the wall even continues into
Yeah.
the roof. So the slenderness, I mean, is what determined the dimensions of this wall. So we are using 500 millimeters in wood. So yeah, the slenderness requirement was for 500, but 500 is also wide enough for someone to work there. Yeah.
Okay, I think we can move as we answer the other questions.
I think we can take a look at the CB storage.
We enter this space. We have 2 other questions. Please, what's the average time to build a 2-story house? Let's say with a kitchen, living room, 2 bedrooms, and 2 bathrooms in rammed earth.
We can give it less than a year.
Okay.
Because this is actually a 2-bedroom house, if you ask me. I don't know what we're building here. I think it's about the usable space is 166 square meters. So maybe overall, say 200 square meters. So, and we are taking a year.
Okay. Then incredible job. Do you spray your papyrus with wax spray to avoid replacement every now and then, or do you just dry and use them like that?
The papyrus and mainly all the natural materials that we're using that are covered are treated with borax. So of course, with that, if you don't have any issues with water washing away the chemicals, it should last for as long as it can. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So yeah, do you wanna?
Yeah, right. So this is where the seed soil is stored. What you see there is what we throw off after the sieving for further sieving to try and get. There's a level of granules that you're trying to get, and what you see right there on the left is the machine into which it's a shame that we couldn't try it out. Perhaps people would be eager to try their hand at it. I tried. I wasn't very successful at pulling it down at first go, but yeah, I don't know on average how many blocks they can create in a day.
About 700.
Which is impressive, I think. And as far as these blocks go with regard to strength, Edson can enlighten us, but they're pretty strong. They're pretty strong.
I mean, strength is actually not a very big issue. The biggest design decision here is the durability, especially for the material that we are not going to protect from rain. So we are designing this in such a way that it will never need to be replaced during the lifetime of the building. So yeah, you may achieve 10 megapascals, but if you cannot actually guarantee that even when the material is wet, then you're failed. So we are designing against a wet strength of about 5, which is probably, I mean, these quarry bricks that we are normally using are about 1, so which is quite impressive.
Yeah. So this is where we store the finished bricks, and it's quite important that we handle them right. So we've been learning that along the way, because you don't want to have them chipping. And you've noticed we're using them in a fair-faced format. That means some of them are going to be exposed as the final finish to the wall. So it's important that we get the neatness right. Also, another thing I may say about these bricks is they come in a module that we decided upon at design phase. But what that module means is all your heights are sort of dictated by that module. So it calls for a meticulous level of detailing to get everything right, because everything that's going to abut that wall needs to meet with that logic in mind, that things are aligning at a particular height. Maybe the windows are aligning at a particular height. So you'll be seeing that as we look at the actual project. I think we should be moving there, unless there's a question here in particular. Right.
Just maybe a note that a lot of the earth that was here was taken like from right over there. So it's literally in situ construction, so earth from the site that builds the building, which is another fun fact. So as we walk to the other space, some other questions from our online viewers. To the question of rammed earth walls thickness, why 500? Why not 600 or 300, 400, etc.? And then we also have a question about, is the firm outsourcing any construction, for example, windows? And maybe one more question, and then we still have more, but we'll group them. What is the costs of building per square meter with rammed earth? How does it compare with brick or stonework? Everyone else, you can please feel free to enter. This is one of our studios. So come Do you remember the question? Yes, this will be an artist studio.
Yes. If you could just refresh the questions, I sort of lost.
One was about the size of the round earth. Why not 300? Why not 600? But I feel like I'd already answered that. It's really just on the stiffness requirements and the constructability of that wall. Someone needs to work within that wall with it. So 300, I don't think you can actually work there. But even if the stiffness allows, 600 may be a waste if 500 can work.
Then are you outsourcing any construction?
Not really. Not really. Apart from plumbing and electrical, the rest is in-house.
Okay. Then cost per square meter with rammed earth, how does it compare with brick or stonework?
Definitely higher. I don't know. That's something that we can probably, because the cost person is not here, but that's something that we can elaborate more maybe later.
Okay.
I think one of the cost drivers in that case is if someone is looking at adopting this technology to a regular, say you want to do it for your house, one of the things that's going to raise the cost is the fact that you have all these tests that you have to do to the earth. That's one. Then you need to design for that particular, the dimensions of it. It can take a specialized team to do it. Unlike the regular brick and mortar, where almost every mason at every one point in this country can sort of make something stand. So when you put those things in mind, it may come up with a higher rate. But I think I always like to think about it in the long-term point of view, because at the same time, when you compare how it works and the fact that you use, say, the earth from your site and looking at the benefit you're giving back to the environment per se, then the conversation may shift that maybe it's higher at the onset when you're constructing the building, but down the line of maintenance and painting ever so often, if you just have your nice fair-faced rammed earth wall, you may not be incurring those costs down the line. So it's sort of, it depends on.
But of course, but this wall will give you the same performance as the brick wall. So you are not comparing like for like.
Do you know the actual cost per square meter? You said not
Per square meter of the wall, of the wall or of the building.
I'm just saying someone was like, I missed the answer. So I'm just trying to, we'll let you know.
So, but to clarify, is that the square meter of the wall or square meter of the building?
So they say building per square meter with rammed earth in general. So I guess maybe on from our side of things, what I know is originally, and James Hampton can talk about this in the presentation, we had wanted the whole building to be rammed earth. And then we looked at the cost per square meter and we're like, maybe not. So we do have a mix of the rammed earth and compressed earth blocks, which brought down the cost. So it's an averaged out cost. So couldn't say for sure right now offhand what the cost per square meter is, but it is likely to be more expensive if we're just looking at it in sheer monetary value. But again, like, what is cost? And I think something we look forward to talking about more in the presentations are how we factor in costs, not just cost and benefits, not just for us as the client, but also our footprint, our impact on the community, what we're doing for the environment. So if a project costs us little but costs the world more, then, you know, is that actually something that we want to do, just be cheap for the sake of it, right? Like, I think that speaks to so much of where we are right now in terms of the climate crisis. And so that's a really important thing for us in thinking about the costs. It's like externalities, economics. What are the things that, you know, are costs not just for us, but also what are the benefits that don't just benefit us, but also benefit our community? Okay, so there are a lot of questions in the chat, but I think what we'll do is, you know, there are all these people physically here. We want to give them some love too. So we're going to also make sure they have time to ask questions about where we are. And we do have your questions in the chat, and we'll answer them also as we go. So please, if you're here, come through, enter. This is one of the artist studios. So really excited to have the first purpose-built artist studio in Kampala. I just have to, you know, I don't want to be sued, but I'd say Uganda, but for sure we can say Kampala. So welcome to the studio.
So one of the things I can mention about that wall in particular, this as well, these are the walls that are going to be plastered. So still the masons were careful with the placing of the bricks, but one would rightly point out that the mortar joints are a bit all over the place. But in the interest of also time, we were like, why spend the very same amount of time you would spend doing that, which will remain as it is here? Like, yeah, it was that kind of thought that this is going to receive about 20 millimeters of plaster, and you'll notice that there's a groove where that is supposed to come and sort of vanish into the rammed earth. So it sort of creates the illusion that the rammed earth starts and stops, and yet it's running all the way through. On the outside, you'll see it running all the way through. So that was a design decision. And what you see on that side, I see some of the, I don't know who has taken to branding the building already, but they already have signage going on. So yeah, one of the interesting things about that wall in particular is the transition from the stone to the brick. And I was asked a few questions earlier about what do you do at that interface? How do you transition properly? So one of the things is is a structural thing that the upper side of the wall and the lower have to be integrated in some way. And possibly Edson will talk about that. But from an architectural perspective, we tend to be obsessive about that mortar joint being 10. And you know, the masons are at pains trying to get it there, but they manage to do it quite well, in my view. So it creates the illusion that it's just sitting there, but there's some structural work underneath that perhaps Edson could shed some light on.
There's actually not much there. It's just a continuous masonry. On the earth, we actually have a concrete kicker because you want to put formwork on something that's a bit level. That's on the rammed earth, but on the masonry wall, that is just a normal mortar bed. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Because it's really a continuation from stone masonry to brick masonry. Yeah.
So, any questions on this part in particular?
Excuse me. Just a little puzzle. How do you fit it in? You fit it in with some kind of cement?
Which one? The stones?
Yeah. So that they
are grouted. They are all grouted with cement.
We call it routing.
Yeah, but yeah, because you press them, you have to press them in a good way, not because we are not plastering them, but then the core is grouted. We put cement grout to hold the stones together. But of course, we are careful. We are trying to be careful that it doesn't come out because no one wants to see it.
Because now my expression comes with these gullies besides the road. Sometimes when there's a lot of water, you see how it splits. Yeah. It's the imagination I was having relative to this.
No.
Okay.
And I think for purposes of water, when we have these window boxes, I think you saw at the sample wall. So it's literally going to sit on this, and it's even going to overlap. So it's going to create.
Okay. How do you design the compressed blocks for the additional resistance to the rain? Do you add something to the mix, cement?
Well, it's all for sure. What is the fines in the soil? Which is the clay. So when that clay actually ends up breaking the material. So over time, we have realized that adding a certain amount of lime in the mix kind of kills that. But of course, there's a balance. Too much lime will destroy it, and too little will also not work. So you have to get the optimum amount where the lime is actually just active.
Okay. Did you have to bring any earth from outside as well? What was the quality of the earth that you found on site?
I don't remember for sure what the quality of earth is. No, we didn't get any soil from outside. It's a bit of a sandy clay soil. And we blend it. Even for the blocks, we're actually blending it with more sand to get the right composition that would be good for stabilizing the cement.
Okay. So many questions. Okay, is guidance given to users in terms of handling, I think, of the blocks, maybe, with regards to potential moisture damage? Or is the wet strength done? Oh, I don't fully understand. Is the wet strength done at a moisture content that is such that no?
Well, the standard testing is that we are soaking these bricks for 24 hours and testing the strength thereafter. But I mean, these blocks are very, very porous, very porous. So even after 1 hour of soaking, they are saturated. But we've even done, a bit of it, not on this site, but just to understand the material where you actually crushed after 3 days of saturation, after 7 days of saturation, what the difference will be. And we realized that 24 hours is optimum. The amount of saturation that you have achieved with this material in 24 hours will not exceed, even if you keep it in there for one year.
Okay.
I think I am yet to hear a question from an artist. Maybe it's the artist asking about wet strength. I highly doubt. So we can continue moving around. Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, we have 8 minutes to 6. So.
All right. Unconventional, but you think we can just jump through the window to look outside instead of going all the way on?
Yeah, let's do it.
Great.
Through the window. I'm a bit interested in help.
Yeah, so what Edson is doing is actually right. If you remember back in the adjacent space, what we were standing on isn't the finished floor level. It's going to be a bit higher. And this will be 450 mil off the finished floor. So this window has basically been designed to be certain. So what he's doing is actually right. Though of course there will be a more comfortable seating area. Yeah.
The window is like in here.
The window is in here.
Ah,
At some
okay.
point comes all the way somewhere. Yeah.
Pushes on.
It's a box.
Ah, so okay. But you can sit from outside in there or from inside?
You see,
Outside, this level will be much lower, so it might be very difficult. But from inside,
Okay.
we are lowering this level to match the road.
Okay. Ah, okay.
So there's a lot of
I see.
retaining.
So you're supposed to sit from inside.
Security.
Yeah.
Yeah, but also so maybe a
Accessible,
short
but
garden.
not too accessible.
Okay.
Yeah.
something else that Edson has just mentioned, that the final floor level where we are standing is going to sort of slope away ever so slightly to the road. And that means the stone you're seeing here, Dan carefully seeing here. So when we sort of scrape away this earth, it's going to. So we can I think we won't go too far that side. Yeah, but this is what it looks like from the outside. Now the lines you're seeing of transition, we're going to have clay drips on the exterior of the wall, because the clay drips sort of help with the runoff, the water that runs off the surface of the wall. So the drip gives it a place where it sort of falls away. And we've done that at the intervals where you ram in layers. So everywhere where you have a layer, you're going to end up with a line. So our clay drips are going to align with those lines, and hopefully at the end, all you'll see will be the clay drips on the exterior. Yes. I don't know if there's some questions here, but we could go back so that we see just the other end, and then we can move to the canteen in preparation for the presentation. Yeah.
Okay, as we move,
Okay.
someone is asking, I'm interested in knowing the lifespan between the stone built house and rammed earth, as well as the adobe bricks. They actually know that, yeah, compressed earth block. But the lifespan, I guess, of the building. I can't hold it, and maybe if you can hold.
Let me help you hold.
Okay.
Yeah, you can answer the question.
All right. So people have built with at least earth construction for so many years, and most of these buildings, some of them are still standing today. So I do believe that these are some of the most long-lasting materials when designed, right? That's when someone asked the question about the lifespan of a building that's designed with rammed earth, I think adobe construction.
Yeah, they mentioned, but
yeah, and as opposed to, I guess, the regular kind of.
I think, as a matter of fact, all buildings are supposed to be designed and built to standards. And for normal buildings, you have at least have a 50-year service life, and that doesn't mean that the building will melt away, but it means that at that point, either the building will no longer serve its purposes structurally, or it might need major maintenance for it to regain its original status. I don't know much about Adobe. We haven't used it much. We haven't researched much about Adobe, but we are designing these materials. That is the material strength, the detailing, at least to serve for 50 years. I'm sure that they will serve much longer than that. be actually much better. The earthen materials would be actually much better than concrete, because with the contamination we have from rainwater, from air, I mean, especially in a city like this, we have a lot of contamination, which actually destroys concrete. It destroys concrete, its strength, it destroys the iron in the concrete. So if you actually avoid that, and on the other hand, what I shouldn't forget is that actually earth cleans air, especially with lime. It cleans the air. It's not destroyed by contamination. It's the other way around. It actually improves the contamination. As far as
Purified. Great. So we have 1 minute left. So what we'll do is, for the other questions sent on the chat and other questions here, there will be time for Q&A as part of the presentation. So we'll just maybe do a quick point out what else is on site and then get settled for the presentation.
Right, so the different studio rooms are more or less typical. So what we saw in the other room is what you expect for these others. Right here is where the washrooms will be. We've sort of designed for that. We have a little niche right there for the storing of our fire safety equipment, because all of us have at one point interacted with a place where you're walking through a corridor and you literally run into a fire extinguisher that's literally clamped to the wall. So we try to be aware of that and design for that. Maybe one last thing I could mention in the interest of time is that why we've sort of pushed this back is we have a sliding shutter that's going to come, and it sort of comes back into this niche and then goes out to close the opening. So these are not like side hang shutters. They'll be sliding to and fro. So that's why. I think we can move back to the canteen. We'll have more time for questions and answers after the presentation. And yeah.
Yeah. So thank you to everyone for joining us for the site tour. We are going to get set up in our future cafe, which is really cool. It's like our first ever event in our space, which is really exciting. So there'll be some presentations from me.
Hello once again, the people that are online. Right, so Localtalks, for those of you for whom this is your first time attending, it's basically a discussion about green design and, you know, the different technologies that we ourselves have worked with, but also things that we are looking into doing. So usually we'll invite other practitioners and we share knowledge. It's all about sharing knowledge about designing better buildings that enhance the community around us in a positive way. So about this session in particular, it's being held as a webinar, as you all can see, and it's being recorded. I must make that known in case you don't like being recorded, so that this is your cue to protest and walk out. So yeah. So in this session, we are going to discuss quite a number of things that are all centered around collaborative construction, and we'll be defining what that means with regard to process and yes. So this session will engage with the expansion and advancement of 32 Degrees East, which is a non-profit organization focused on the creation and exploration of contemporary art in Uganda. So maybe Teesa will talk a bit more about 32 Degrees East. Right now, I'm just going to introduce our panelists today. For those of you that do not know Teesa, Teesa Bahana is right there. She's yeah. Yes, Teesa Bahana is director of 32 Degrees East Uganda Arts Trust. It's a not-for-profit that promotes the creation and exploration of contemporary art in Uganda. As director, she has supported the development and execution of projects such as the Kampala Art Labs for research and critical thinking through public partners such as Arts Collaboratory and Triangle Network. So she's also currently overseeing 32 Degrees East's capital project, raising funds basically to build the first purpose-built in is currently with an academic ground in sociology and society and how it's a 32 education. So without further, yes, over to you, Teesa.
Welcome again. It's been about an hour. But really, so glad to have you here. Like, you're literally the first people in our future home. Like, this right here is the future in so many ways. And we are so proud to have gotten this far. It's been many years in the making, which I'll talk a little bit about. But you are blessing this space for us right now. Like, this is, you are the first ever people on our site using our building for the purpose that we intend for it to be used for, which is really community, knowledge sharing, bringing people together from different environments to think differently, think a bit bigger about what's possible, expand our imaginations in new ways. So really, like, couldn't have imagined us kind of inaugurating the space in a better way. So thanks for blessing us. I'd say that it's like high ceilings, like a church, honestly. It's a pretty serious building. And so we are currently in what will be our cafe. So maybe just a little bit about, when I say we, who we actually is, why we have a cafe, why we are using Earth, why we are working with Localworks and Newmakers Bureau. We are 32 Degrees East, as James shared, and we are a home for artists, for art lovers, the art curious, to really find a space where they belong, find a space where they can meet like-minded and unlike-minded people, and be encouraged by difference rather than threatened by it. A space where people who practice creativity feel valued, feel like what they do matters, and where just practically we connect people to tools, to resources, to opportunities, and to each other. So we've been doing this for just over 10 years. We were founded in 2011 by Roka Holinambi and Nicola Elphinstone, who both came to Uganda around the same time. They had actually both come from the UK. And Nicola was coming from a commercial arts background, and Roka was coming from a practicing artist background. And for both of them, you know, came to Kampala, found, okay, it's a really vibrant, dynamic city. There's so much going on in terms of culture. But in terms of the arts, particularly visual arts, there aren't any spaces for artists to gather. There weren't really any spaces for artists to move outside of their studios where they were maybe working in silos, to come and just meet other artists and see, you know, what are people doing? What are people making with? How are people managing to buy supply and managing to deal with people who often will, you know, book an artist for a commission and not pay them, right? Like how are artists surviving? Especially because for a lot of artists in Uganda, there's kind of this dismissiveness around what you do. If you tell maybe your parents that you want to become an artist, they don't really encourage that. They in fact might discourage that. If they do encourage it, then you maybe go to Makerere, which has a good arts program. Once you leave, you don't actually get to see, in fact, while you're in school, you don't get to see what it means to be a working artist in the world. Who are examples? Who's making work? Who's been making work for 20 years? And how have they done it? And so it became important, at least from their perspective, to have a space where artists actually get to connect, particularly because it felt really lonely for a lot of artists. So in their first year, I really spent a lot of time getting to speak to different artists, and not just artists, but professors, curators, writers, different art educators to see what do you need, what kind of missing, right? Like Makerere with Margaret Trowell is really well known. In fact, not just in East Africa, in terms of the continent, it's known as being a really good art school. But beyond that, like what actually happens for us, right? So, you know, once you graduate, what happens? What if you don't graduate? What if you don't go to school? Are there continuous education opportunities? For people who have studied also in Uganda, and not just, I mean, even for me, I grew up in Zambia, and often, if you're good in school, you're good at memorizing. You're good at repeating what the teacher tells you and, you know, saying it back really nicely. And you're not really encouraged to critically think. And yet, art is really the domain for critically thinking, right? To say, why is it that we do things the way we do? Why are things set up like this and not another way? And often, a lot of people who have been educated in certain schools, even in the arts, are told this is the right way to make art, which is like kind of a tragedy, right? Like it's really the thing where there's no right way. Like it's really about pushing boundaries, experimenting, failing, all these things. And so all of that kind of ethos is what the retreat is about having a space where people, again, not just connect to each other and know that they're not alone, and find community, but also get to push the boundaries and think differently and have a space where they can do that. So how that actually happens is we have our residency program where artists are given materials budget, a per diem, and physical space and access to a library where they can just try something new. Like for 3 months, no pressure. You don't have to make, no offense to the people who do it, maybe do it in interesting ways, so no shade, but you know, you don't have to make a painting with a gorilla because you know that someone can buy it, right? Because that's often you are making work for an audience that you know will buy it. And in this residency, it's like, you know, did you want to experiment with beetroot today? Come and do it. Come and try something. That really speaks to who you are as an artist, why you wake up every day to make art. It could be that you want to explore working with a different population that you've never worked with before. So maybe you've always wanted to work with farmers in your art. And through a residency, we give you the space to do that. And at the end of 3 months, there's no pressure of, okay, you have to exhibit, you have to sell your work, you have to invite 60 people and you have to like sign their names and, you know, give them a per diem or whatever. Like none of that strict NGO type of recognizing of your work. No, you have to make an impact report and assessment and metrics and all that. Just have an open studio and talk about your experience. Talk about what you learned, what you didn't learn. We had an artist who came in residency once who at the end of the 3 months, she's like, I want to be a farmer instead. not really about the art thing. And we're like, okay, cool. That's actually a pretty good resident. And I think, you know, I didn't come from an art background, but for me, I kind of think residency should be in everything. You know, it's really, I think, a way of slowing down, of reflecting, of having the chance to really try something without this fear of failure. And in fact, we even encourage failure because that is how we learn. So that's a big part of what we do with the residencies. And I think it's a big part of what we're doing. I don't have that much more time to do that happen. So to actually talk about why this is happening. In 2016, I joined the team, and I really have a lot of gratitude and thanks to the previous directors and founders because they were very intentional about thinking about the longevity of this. Making art, one, as I said, I hope I've painted enough of a picture, and I think some of you know, it's not easy. It's like in any context, but in Uganda specifically, there's not much funding for it. Again, really just mixed on a societal level. There's not much infrastructure. How many of you know that we have a national gallery? Okay. Two people. And this is an art audience. 2 people know. How many of you have been to a national gallery? No, no more gallery. So some people have been to Norma and did not know it's a national gallery. Some people thought Makerere was a national gallery. So that tells you a lot, right? Like the access to normal gallery, you have to pass through some cards and sign and they intimidate you. So just imagine, right? Like being an artist, not easy. What? Being an art space, also not. If everything is telling you that this doesn't matter, then imagine like to find funding on a government level, there's not much funding for the arts. If there was, I don't know if it's granted, but that also comes with certain ties, which means you don't have as much freedom of expression. So in terms of longevity, it then becomes really important, right? If we've established that, okay, over all these years, what we do matters, working with artists matter, what they produce, what they have to say, how they make us think and reflect matters. And how do we make sure we keep existing, right? Because so many people have started really exciting projects and they die for lack of funding, for lack of community support, for many reasons. And we've seen that here in Kenya and lots of different places. And so often that's also because in terms of funding, you have international funders that after a few years, they change their priorities and they got, even though they were really like holding it down because there isn't much else that exists. You also have funders who will come in and say, you know, we think, okay, art it's cool, right? Because you can teach people about corruption. It's not cool for itself. Art isn't cool on its own. It's only cool if it fits within our specific metrics and what we want to deliver. So we'll give you money for that, but we won't give you money for your salaries. We won't give you money for electricity. We won't give you money for your bills. So you can keep running your projects, but beyond that, sorry, you know, it's not within our terms, right? So that's kind of the landscape that we're dealing with. And so the previous directors really thought, how do we make sure that what we do beyond us lasts? And we're able to find funding to purchase a plot of land. And so we were able to do that. That's one of the things I did when I joined. And it was great because I just came in and they're like, okay, go buy land. Cool, good first step. And they also left us with a great funder called June Foundation through Arts Collaboratory that had given us 5 years of unrestricted funding. And that meant that we had the time and space to dream of this. And it's really important, I think, to mention that because often people will ask, like, and will say, oh, wow, well done, like you came this far, how did you do it? And I think if we were in an instance where we were looking for money every 2 seconds, this wouldn't happen. And the fact that we're working with James Hampton through Newmakers Bureau is because as well, he was really good friends with one of the founders and so offered pro bono services to design. And so, yes, And that's also really important because it meant when we were fundraising, we had somewhere to start, right? Like we had this visual that was really inspiring for people to say, okay, I'm in, like, let's go. And that also took a very long time, like really like 3 people said I'm in for us to get to where we are. And that's what it takes. It like really was a few people who had faith in us and in the vision and who said yes to the design. And I think that's a huge part of the things that I've often spoken about. Like these things just kind of happen. We wrote some crunch applications and it happened, but it's been since 2016 is when we've been talking about this project. Like I met James in 2016 and I met Felix in 2016. And originally when we bought the land, okay, so as I said, the founders, they did a great job. They left us money and you know, some money for land. But the idea was, okay, you pick up the containers, which we had in Kansanga, you pick them up and you move them and then you start. And then you're like, okay, take money to move the containers. And then we also need security. And then we also need an office space. And we also need to build bathrooms. And like, okay, we'll need more money. But if we're going to ask people for money, like, let's dream big a little bit, right? Like, let's not just ask for money to move containers. Like, we actually have the opportunity to build something with artists in mind, to be a center for artists, designed with their image. We've been using these shipping containers, which have been great, but like sometimes leak, you know, sometimes when it's 30 plus degrees, you're in a metal box sweating. If an artist who uses, you know, materials that have like really heavy. Sorry, I have to shut you out. I'm, you know, go. So make you see so right now. Was program manager with 32 for 3 years. Yeah, 2 years. 2 years. And yes, and what it takes. So thank you for joining us. Thank you. Thank you for joining me. So glad you could make it. And yeah, I think it just kind of speaks to yes, we had the shipping containers. Shipping containers, hot. You're making, imagine like really like you're dealing with spray paint, for example, those fumes, right? And artists made it work because artists make things work, but we're like, our artists deserve more. And so how can we make this happen? And so thanks to James Hampton, who will speak more about the design for this project. Thanks to Felix, who again, I met in 2016. Yes, that's what I was gonna say. And I met in 2016, he's like, okay, so you wanna move these containers, okay. So you have money for the land, okay. You know, to build, it's like 3 times the budget for purchasing land. And I was like, oh. Okay, good to know. And I think maybe he'll talk about it, but I wonder what he thought when we had that meeting. He was probably like, oh, that's if they make it. And we did. Like to get this point is, I think, yeah, like it's been many years in the making. And the only reason we got this far, I think, is because of the community that we're a part of and collaboration. And I think also really having a vision for what the space would do for artists, again, to show that they deserve a space that is built with them in mind. And also a space, I think, that beyond just artists is really thinking about our future, right? Like what kind of world we want to live in. We want to live in a world where we have space that use earth construction because they're responsible and thinking about the environment. We want to live in a space where in terms of financial sustainability, we're not reliant on donor funding, and we can say we get to set our priorities, the artists get to decide what they want to do, and they get to dream for us as well and chart the dream path, right? And so for us to own this space, we literally own it. Our name is on the title. It will always be an art, and it will always be dedicated to that, regardless of who's involved. And so I think I'll end there, but really, like, it's been many years in the making and been because of the relationships that we built. And we really believe that this physical space embodies the values that we want to see of community, of creation, of imagination. and of responsibility to the earth we're living. So yeah, thank you very much.
Right, another round of applause. Welcome once again to everyone that has been able to join. I believe Teesa has set us on the path of understanding the what and the why. So next up, the next presenter is James Hampton, who is the founding director of Newmakers Bureau. One of the interesting things is I myself am James and he is James. So in meetings, we usually had that where they ask a question to James, and for a moment, you're hoping you're not the one being asked some of the questions, you know? Yeah, but he established the practice, which is Newmakers Bureau, to make architecture that is designed for both its experiential quality and environmental value. He wants to reconnect architecture practice with making and to explore the tactile and sensual experience of buildings. He believes that we should design buildings placing as much value on them, on how they make us feel, as how they work. So James studied at the Bartlett School of Architecture, University College London, where he graduated with a distinction and later qualified as an architect. He has worked for a number of leading architecture practices, including Will, Alsop, and Studio Egret West, where he led the Parkhill project, Europe's largest listed building, winning the Architects Journal Retrofit Award, and reaching the RIBA Sterling Prize shortlist. Before founding Newmakers Bureau, James co-founded Periscope, a combined architecture and landscape practice. James has lectured both in the UK and internationally, and has taught at degree and master's level at the Bartlett, where he currently teaches in the master's school. He's also recently appeared on BBC's Panorama program, sharing his views about how to save the high street. So ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome James with a round of applause. He's going to be sharing his screen.
Hi everyone, can you hear me okay?
The sound.
Shall I start?
Yes, James, we can hear you. We
Cool.
Just a moment.
Can you see me? Okay, maybe I can start chatting whilst you're sorting out the screen. Yeah, so thank you for that introduction. That was very kind. And Tessa's amazing, inspirational talk as well, presentation, which is like really, really good. So can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can see you.
Oh, cool.
Are you doing something at the moment?
Okay, I've got some slides as well. So I'll just start, shall I? There, can you see my slides?
Yes, great. So we can see that.
Cool. Okay.
We just can't hear you.
Oh, okay.
Right. I think it's okay now.
Yeah, is that good?
No, still can't hear you. Sorry.
Oh, shall I try? I'll unmute myself. How's that?
Hello. Hi, James. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Yeah. Can you hear me?
It's just our sound. Online. James, maybe if you want to say something for the online people as me.
Okay, I'll just flick through the I'll flick through the slides. Cool. We'll do a silent slideshow for the people in the cafe, which seems a bit of a shame.
Battery 100%. Ready?
Connected here?
Yeah.
James, we can hear you now.
Yeah. Okay. Is that good?
Yes.
Okay. Cool. I'll start. Yeah. I mean, Tessa's done a really good job of explaining sort of a bit of the history. I want to talk about a bit more of the sort of the design history, I guess. And yeah, and I think just to sort of emphasize and reiterate what Tessa said about the fact that it's been such a kind of long journey to get to this point, that it hasn't been a sort of necessarily a straightforward process. And it started, I think Tessa was joined 32 just as we were starting to get involved, and we were asked to help move the containers. So there were these 4 or 5 containers on the previous site, previous site, and yeah, we were asked to help move them, help look for the new site, you know, if we could advise or anything like that. Yeah, and then it kind of just grew into something much bigger, that we sort of questioned why you'd spend all this money just kind of moving these containers, because it's not as simple as just kind of picking them up and moving them, actually, as Tessa sort of referred to. And why don't we yeah, just set our goals a little bit higher. And I think what was amazing is working with Tessa, actually, that she was able to, she wasn't kind of concerned by that, you know, that kind of monumental fundraising requirement that she, you know, that she's ultimately responsible for. Yeah, she just kind of took it and ran with it, and then here we are. Now you're sitting in the building almost complete, you know, the first phase almost complete. So these sketches are like really early on sketches, 2016. I think this was before there was even a site, so it was just sort of almost brief forming. I thought what was really interesting is even when there wasn't a site, there was this idea of a courtyard building. So this was done, you know, this was done before any sites at all. There's this idea of a courtyard as this kind of social space, as this communal space, that everything kind of came from this courtyard, and it was a shady space. There'd be kind of planting and trees, and there'd also be roofs that overhang. And again, there's this sort of containment to the building that somehow it would feel both kind of open and inviting, but it would also feel very secure for the artist. That this, you know, there's kind of a metaphor really for what 32 do, that it's a place that artists can feel kind of safe and secure and kind of do what they like. So that was kind of an idea right from the beginning. And this was the initial site. It was kind of, thinking about it now, it kind of feels like it was a bit awkward compared to the site now, but it was kind of bigger. It was in a bit more of a quiet residential area, so there's some kind of issues with how you might deal with the neighbours. And the concept was quite different because of that. We thought of this, because it was a bigger site, we thought of this kind of campus arrangement where these smaller kind of individual pavilion buildings sat in the landscape. Some would be kind of covered, some would be completely enclosed, some might be half inside and half outside. You kind of navigate your way around this site and find these buildings, but the components, the key components were still there. If you look on the right hand side of the screen is the 4 containers that we were reusing, and then the centre, that sort of big building, is the gallery space, and then there were artist studios and there were artist residences towards the rear of the site. But by the time we got to, this is one of the images we used to kind of, you know, sell the project in a way to fundraise as well. But by the time we got to this site, it was actually about 3 or 4 years later. It was kind of 2020, I think, end of 2019 or sort of beginning of 2020, mid 2020. And it's a completely different site, but I think lots of the kind of key principles and kind of values of the project in a way had been established. So it was definitely more it it was a faster process to get to the design once we got to this site. You know, there were some similarities, like it was very, very slopey, and maybe that's something that's, you know, because Kampala is built on hills, maybe that's quite familiar to a lot of Kampala anyway. But in this instance, because the site's a bit smaller, actually that change in level is quite dramatic from one side of the site to the other. And you'll see that's why we developed this kind of stone datum, which goes along the bottom of the building, is this kind of horizontal datum line, which kind of tells you where you are on the slope. And I should have mentioned that this presentation, we've just kind of shown lots of our process, really. Some of the kind of more messy things that we might not usually show, just to kind of reveal how we work. And as a practice, we very much kind of work between making models, doing things in the computer three-dimensionally, taking photographs of the models, doing hand sketches, and these things kind of go around in a bit of a tumble dryer or kind of washing machine that they kind of all mix up together. And then we look at kind of research of things we like, things we're interested in, things we think are relevant to this project. So this is somewhere in between the 7th and 13th century. There's this amazing place in Ethiopia, a series of churches which are kind of carved out of the earth, that, you know, they weren't there, they were just carved away. And we've kind of taken that idea in a way to this project, that the building is very much of the earth. We're not necessarily carving into it, we kind of are in places, but everything, as much as possible, the building comes from the site directly. And then, you know, there's this idea about shadows and the significance of darkness versus light. And I remember one of the really early conversations I had with Felix at Localworks back in 2016, I think, the first time we came to Kampala, that, you know, as a person coming from the UK and being educated in the UK, where, you know, kind of the modernist tradition of architecture is like having huge windows and loads of light. That's a very, very kind of, you know, standard thing that architects will do in the UK and much of Europe as well. But, you know, he pointed out that in Uganda, you're on the equator, and actually you've got so much light that sometimes you might want to retreat away from the light and have spaces that are much more shady and much darker. And, you know, so there's things like that, these kind of sensitivities to the very specific nature of Kampala and the place that we do not have, you know, that are impossible for us to have, and that we have learned so much from this dialogue with Localworks and with 32 as well, that actually, you know, some of that stuff as well we've kind of taken back to the UK. So there's a bit of a kind of cross between, you know, and that's one of the reasons we're doing this, you know, purely from a selfish perspective. There's so much stuff that we're learning in this project that it's, you know, that we're kind of bringing into the UK, and it also allows us to do things that we might not be able to do in the UK, you know, at this stage in our development as a practice. So, you know, the building out of rammed earth, for example, in the UK, it's quite difficult. And, you know, all those questions you had earlier about how much cement goes into the rammed earth and how much is the earth and all the rest of it, building a rammed earth wall in the UK is pretty much, you know, it's mainly cement, and then there's a bit of earth chucked in. It's a very different thing. It's, you know, it doesn't have quite the same environmental sort of considerations as it does when we're doing it in Kampala, which is really, really nice. And I think that's another thing, you know, kind of draw of this project for us, is our practice is really focused on embodied carbon, particularly. So the amount of energy that goes into the building of the building before it's even been occupied. And, you know, in the UK, it's about 50% of a building's whole life carbon is kind of spent before the building's even been moved into, which is a crazy, crazy statistic when you think about it. So, you know, building out of earth and using materials from the site or as close to the site as possible is all about reducing the embodied carbon in the building. And it also has some amazing sort of thermal qualities as well. It has really high thermal mass, so it kind of holds in the cool air from the nighttime and helps to re-radiate it in the daytime so that the spaces feel a bit cooler. So, you know, so those thick walls that are 500 millimeters thick made of earth actually help to cool the space as well. So I think that's, yeah, this is kind of idea of the building being almost like a love affair with earth, you know, with like different ways you can experiment and use earth in construction. And another thing that we've kind of learned, that a lot of that knowledge has come from Localworks, because they've been doing it, you know, all over Uganda, and they've taken us to some of their amazing earth projects, you know, out of Kampala. And I think this is the first one, the first rammed earth project in Kampala. Felix can confirm that for me or not. But I think, again, there's this kind of knowledge sharing that we're kind of learning from Localworks in terms of all their constructional knowledge and also the way they work. You know, it's really nice working with another architecture practice and learning how they work and learning what their process is. And, you know, hopefully they've learned some of what our process is as well. And this kind of exchange between us. But Localworks, you know, they go and make things. As soon as there's a sort of problem that we're discussing about how we make, you know, the roof or how we make a piece of wall or whatever, they just say, well, let's go and test it, you know, immediately goes and gets tested. And that's how they kind of learn. And again, in the UK, that doesn't happen quite as much, you know, until you're kind of at the later stages on site. In the UK, it's much more, the kind of regulations are much tighter, and it's a different, slightly different kind of creative environment for working as an architect. So that's been really nice to sort of see how that those processes differ and what we can kind of learn from them. This is the gallery space, and there's a few images I think before this as well and after, which show the progression of the gallery space. So this is pretty much how it will be when it's complete now. And this is actually an image from Localworks, and I think there's certain things that, you know, happened. I think the reason we're showing these images is that happened during the really detailed design phases, that things inevitably change in the architectural process anyway. And so, you know, even when you're on site, things change. But with Localworks, there's this really nice sort of generosity of their spirit in a way, that everything, that all these kind of changes that happened came with a really good understanding of what we were trying to do in the building, the kind of really core principles of our, you know, that we wanted the building to do. And they managed to kind of improve it. I think the building, as a result of this collaboration, is much better than it would have been without it. It probably would have been, you know, it might not have even worked, to be frank with you, because we don't understand the, you know, the context in a way completely fully. And there's something, you know, I think some of the images in here we've got show images of the roof construction, for example, because we had a really tough time designing the roofs. Designing roofs in the UK has, you know, it's a completely different kind of set of criteria. It's a completely different thing. Roofs, you know, sometimes you don't have any roofs, you just have a kind of flat roof with a little parapet that comes up. Sometimes you have these kind of slightly overhanging eaves or pitches or whatever. But in Uganda, you kind of, you know, really need these overhangs, these really, really big overhangs. And roofs, as a result, tend to be quite expressive, or have the, you know, the possibilities of being really, really expressive. And that was something we found quite challenging. You know, these are some of the model studies we did, kind of testing all these different ways that the roof might change and work. And it didn't really end up being any of those. And, you know, you see probably a reoccurring sort of theme in these slides, that the roofs kind of change quite often until we get down to kind of what we've got now kind of on site. And then, yeah, this is quite a developed, so this image is sort of sometime, I think, when we had the sort of planning stage. You can see the roofs are still very sort of flat and not very detailed, and it's like the rest of the building has been quite well considered, and the roofs still haven't, you know, we haven't really understood how to kind of do the roofs at this stage. And it's, yeah, it's quite interesting that that was one of the last things that kind of got pinned down in a way, and kept kind of changing. So this is a view from just as you're walking sort of down past the main road and then towards the university, which kind of cuts through. And you can see that kind of stone datum line that was always really, really important to us. And then these big punched out windows which frame specific views. So when you're inside, there's kind of two different types of windows in a way. There's really, really big openings, which are about kind of, you know, this inside outside connection that people on the outside of the building, the public, can see and have this kind of porosity, which the cafe will have and which those kiosks will have on the left of your image now. And then there's also these windows that are much smaller and a bit more intimate, and they're much more about the individual inside, kind of having a very specific view outside, or a very specific relationship with the outside. And the ones that I think James or Edson were sitting in just now in the studios, you know, where you have a window seat and you'll be able to sit there kind of in the window and sort of straddling the inside and the outside. And then this was one of the kind of earlier images, so you can see how the roofs still haven't been kind of fully resolved yet, and the buildings were really tall at this point, because again we hadn't quite figured out how to negotiate the pitch of the roof versus the overhangs. And then you can see this is kind of getting there, but it's not quite what we ended up with. Feels a bit too squat. But there was this kind of very iterative process, doing these kind of drawings and images, and then working back with 32, working with the trustees as well, and with the board, and then working with Localworks as well. And there's loads of this that we've just kind of pulled out from our server, but I thought it was quite interesting to see, and also to show you some of the kind of more crude stuff. You know, this is us kind of, we wouldn't usually show this, it's just how we kind of explore things, and normally we'd be kind of spinning around these models to kind of understand what they feel like. There was always this kind of idea, you know, above. So there's the stone datum, and then there's the rammed earth datum, and then above that there's this area which is much more about kind of letting in dappled light and ventilation as well. So in that kind of roof space above the rammed earth, there's always some openness which lets in light and also ventilates. And there's a little gap between the roof and the top of that brick wall as well, which lets in ventilation and lets in air. There's also this kind of idea about textures and exploring all these different textures, because again, the qualities in Kampala, the light qualities on the equator where the sun kind of goes straight up and then straight down again, is very different again from the UK. So we were quite kind of hypnotized by that in a way, that what you can do with shadow and that play of the light as it moves across the face of the building, how you can explore all these different textures in the building's skin to sort of really emphasize the way that the sun's moving. So yeah, this is kind of the plan that's pretty much settled on now and is what will be constructed. So you're sitting in the bottom left of that image, which is the cafe, and then the studios run off, which is phase 1, and then in phase 2 is the art gallery. There's another kind of sub courtyard which the art gallery opens out onto, so you have this quality of being able to have artwork outside in the courtyard directly associated with the gallery space as well. And then right to the rear of the site is the accommodation, because it's the kind of quietest place in the site. And you might have seen from the roof plan, there's these slots which go across the roofs, which again let light in, very, very thin, so you don't have too much solar gain, too much heat coming into the spaces. But you'll get enough light that when you're in the studio, you've got enough light to illuminate your work, or when you're in the cafe, you've got enough light to see what you're doing. So you can see here the pop-out windows, and then the sort of open brickwork in the band above the rammed earth, which is for ventilation, but also gives you this kind of soft quality of light. And the same in the cafe on the left as well. And this image is pretty much kind of where you're sitting now. So that will be, yeah, where you're sitting. And there's little details like the lintels above the doors, so these kind of concrete elements that you see in the kind of reddy tones above the doorways, which we've cast using corrugated metal, because again, that was something that we felt as a, you know, someone visiting Kampala, it was very, very much that we saw these metal roofs everywhere, these corrugated metal. We thought it was quite a sort of very familiar texture. We wanted to reuse it in the language of the building, but in these little details. So the lintel details are cast against corrugated metal as this little kind of nod in a way to the context. And then there's these 2 last images, which is kind of, again, these are from Localworks, but I think they just sum up the collaboration really well. That they talk about, this was so the part of the building on the left, we really couldn't figure out how we were going to deal with the first floor and the openings in the first floor. We had these kind of big square windows before, and they just didn't work, and they let in too much light. And then, you know, working through months and months of this process with Localworks, we came up with this solution that wasn't just about, it was about light, it was about ventilation, it was about the structural strategy, which we wouldn't have arrived at, you know, on our own. Yeah, there we are. I think I was given 20 minutes, so hopefully that was on.
Thank you very much, James. I don't know if you can hear the people clapping.
Yes, I can. Yes, thank you.
Multidisciplinary design collaborative that specializes in design and realization of great architecture and Artachat. As an established group of designers, Localworks have over the years delivered a number of sustainable design projects, often located in remote parts of the country, and always characterized by a deep love for local materials,
Hi, everyone. I hope you can. Huh? I can't hear me, and I hear myself. So probably you guys just mute yourself, and then we get going. Yeah, great to be with you, even though I'm forced to be at home. I would have loved to be with you all guys there. And lovely to follow up with my presentation, these two really inspiring speakers before me. This whole evening, as we have anticipated it, is meant to be talking about collaboration and about the process of building, designing, building, and then eventually using the space. And I think it is these relatively complex and interesting processes really only work if there is a shared set of values across all the parties that take place or that play a role in such a process. And I can't really, overemphasize on how important Teesa is in this entire process. I think James also mentioned it. That sort of fearless, mission-driven approach to 32 degrees east is what really has driven this whole process. And in the history of Localworks, 32 degrees east plays a very important role. And I think today I will talk a little bit about that, because I will really mostly talk about the methodology and the process more than about, how we're building this building. I think Edson and James at the beginning have done a great job in responding to some of the more technical queries, and maybe we can also discuss that a bit more in the Q&A session. And our collaboration with Newmakers Bureau is also very important. I think James has spoken from his side, and from our side, it was equally inspiring, and it was a fantastic learning curve to work with an architect who had designed the building and who knew exactly what he wanted, and then to basically work out for us to actually take over the detailing from somebody it's something that's not easy to do, and it can really only be done. I've always said that jokingly when somebody asked me, could you do this role for us? Could you take over this role? I always said yes, provided that you are a better designer than we are. In other words, that you really know what you want, and you have a very clear conceptual mind. And James has that, and I think that is why this process has been, very, very productive in a way. So I'm going to talk about what I call the Baumeister approach, and how the design of a green school in Uganda led to the creation of a design and build collaborative. So I will talk a little bit about the history of Localworks and how our process, how we moved, how we got to the idea of building ourselves, and I will then talk about the process of designing and building a little bit more. This is sort of how we started. Our history goes back to 2013. And our idea was really to start as a multidisciplinary design group focusing exclusively on green architecture. But at this stage, I should say that the idea of how such designs can be delivered was really conventional in the sense. Our idea was, like in any other commercial architectural practice, we would design and then we would help the client find a suitable contractor, and then we would supervise that contractor on behalf of our clients, and we would run the contracts on behalf of them. In addition to developing our design skills, because you learn from project to project, we developed with the years quite a good system of delivering projects in this conventional procurement system. So we became better at what we were doing, also in the sense of delivering. We did schools, we did community centers, lodges, restaurants, residential homes and such things, always designed of being as appropriate as possible, being environmentally conscious, experimenting with local materials, and also especially getting our teeth into earth construction, which was something that we were all very attracted to. I think you heard especially Edson talking about it. I think this is something that we really we got excited about and wanted to learn. And then of course all of that trying to be socially and culturally appropriate as well. In many ways, I could say that this journey was a smooth ride. We got a lot of interesting projects, and we got better at what we're doing, and we enjoyed what we're doing, and we were being given the opportunity to try out stuff. For that, you need the right clients, but to a certain extent, you also attract the right clients by doing what you're doing. If you have a very clear identity in what you're trying to achieve, there was really only one cloud on the horizon, and that was that we realized that we were running out of contractors. I think there were two key reasons why we were running out of contractors. For one, we are quite meticulous in what we are trying to achieve. We are certainly not the only ones, but if you speak to contractors, then on one hand they do appreciate an architect who knows what he wants, but on the other hand, if you really now police this to the last you know, dot and detail, it becomes something that some contractors experience as quite a burden on them. And then the other main reason I would say was that I would say became more and more adventurous in how we wanted to use primary structural materials, which is also not something that a typical contractor is very excited about. At that point in time, we were just working on a monastery project in Raqqa in southern Uganda, and we went through a particularly difficult phase in regards to delivering this project successfully. This project was generally a very complex project. It had a barrel vaulted church with reinforced brickwork, and it has pre-stressed hit and miss walls as structural elements, and fair-faced polished concrete floor, and all these things. And we were initially very excited about the contractor that was chosen on our recommendation, but sadly we realized at some point that let's say our ambition as the design architects and the contractor's more commercial approach did not really gel very well, and it became quite a tough process for the client as well. We should always not forget that such issues directly affect the client just as much as they affect the other two parties. At that point in time, a group of people walked through our office doors called Friends of Mustard Seed, and their idea was to start a new type of Ugandan village school. They were extremely ambitious in what they wanted to achieve. They started a school from scratch, and they wanted to really invent a new type of curriculum, a new type of education that marries what is normal in Uganda, the normal Ugandan way of teaching, with different ways of teaching. Active learning was one of the key words. The importance of the arts to the education, the idea of teaching outdoor partially, teaching you know, in nature, being very practical, hands-on. And for them it was very clear that what their idea of education needed to be also reflected in the spaces in which this takes place, which was an exciting prospect for us. We went about designing this project with great enthusiasm, and in a process that developed its own sort of its own life, if you want. Everybody was involved. It was not sort of the architect drawing something. It was really a participatory design process that was really gratifying, I think, for everyone. And out of this came a school that has sort of these non-rectangular classrooms, as you can see there on that floor plan. And the idea of building these walls out of the material that we were excavating in a non-stabilized form, which then led to the idea of using earthbag as our primary structural material. And here, really, whilst this process was wonderful and enjoyable, there was always this one thing in the back of everybody's mind, not only ours, but also the clients. And that was, again, that cloud on the horizon to say, who is going to be that contractor? Who are we going to put on the shortlist for our tender? Now that we are even using stone foundations and non-stabilized earth construction, lime plaster, all these things that just nobody does in this country. So really you can say that two elements: one, a growing frustration about a generally unproductive way of working or of constructing, and two, our growing appetite for experimentation. Those two really now combined to form the idea that we needed to start our own building group. And that is really how Localworks started. In 2019, you can see there's some images of the group as we were like last year, and also some images of our workspace. We created the idea of Localworks around 4 pillars, as we call them, as they are mentioned there: research, design, build, and share. Design and build is what sort of everybody knows about, but we felt that you can't do this type of work if you don't also emphasize on the importance of research. And then the share element is the reason why we're here this evening. On the research side, this is mostly about exploring the materials that we're using, the technologies that we are interested in. There is generally not very much available in terms of proper research in the on stuff that is relevant to the East African construction sector in the green area. So we want to change that over time. We want to promote the use of local materials by providing proper information about it. Examples of what we have done in the past is learning about earth construction, is learning about materials like bamboo, is also about developing certain technologies. So we are doing something that we call eco prefab at the moment, where we are developing a system that we hope can be replicated more easily. Another aspect that is very important about this research is that it is not being carried out by professional researchers or scientists. It's actually carried out by the designers themselves, together with the builders. And that, of course, creates its own interesting dynamic, where a designer who maybe works on a particular material testing, or indeed on a one-to-one mock-up, will develop a completely different understanding of what he or she is drawing and is designing. And equally, by pulling in the builders into this process, you will ensure a much smoother construction process later, because they have been involved at that stage and they understand what this is all about. So in the instance of the roof for 32 degrees, we did this mock-up, we did trials with different timber shingles and such things, and it was done by the designers and the builders together, and then also monitored over time by that very same team. This is actually an image of one of the mock-ups that we did for the roof of 32 degrees. The design department is really doing what it's been doing before, and that is trying to design, contextual green buildings in whatever form we are being given the opportunity to do so. And we are lucky to work on interesting projects. In the moment, the team, for instance, is working on a music center for a refugee camp, on an earthbag house. We've stuck to earthbag somehow, and on an interesting green urban renewal project that is also quite enjoyable. Then the build team, for us it was mostly about, that was what we are mostly engaged about in the last 2 years, building up the capacity to actually properly deliver construction projects. For us this meant mostly establishing a senior management team at the construction site consisting of a construction manager, finance manager, and a person for admin and HR. And then on the site level, it was about really calling on our many contacts that we have built up over the years and really bringing together the skills that we know people have, bringing the right people together, and then building on the skill that is already there and improving it with time. I think skilling and growing the team is the biggest challenge on our construction site that we're working very hard on. Having completed the mustard seed project, our second project was indeed 32 degrees. And it is really inspiring to see how some of the lessons learned on the first project have directly translated already into a serious improvement on the second project. And how there has already been some kind of understanding of the Localworks way of doing things that simply speed up the process. And I do expect this to improve with time further. Then a third project that we have now just started on site is that eco prefab project that I mentioned, where we are building some teachers' housing in Ruengo district. Our fourth pillar is something that all of you are aware of because you're taking part in it. Localtalks is part of the share idea behind Localworks. What's the point of building up knowledge and of generating ideas if you don't share them? What other benefit would there be really in multiplying something that we believe is right? And I think that is one of the key ideas behind Localtalks, where we pick, themes that we are interested in, that pop up during our daily work, that some people suggest to us, and we bring them together and we invite the right people and then try to share views, ideally from a slightly different angle, but on the same subject, and then have an engaging discussion around it. And I think this has now existed for, I think, about 2 years, and some of these events have really been inspiring and have actually generated not only a very good discussion, but also an interesting network of people who keep coming back together and who actually network even outside of these events. Then we have, as a second aspect of this share idea, there is also the idea of a pro bono program. Of course, we are being asked a number of times to come in on projects where an initiative or a group of people could not normally afford our services. And for such cases, we have a pro bono program that provides services free of charge when certain criteria are met. This little project here in Kisoro is actually one of them, where we built a little village in a self-built approach, which was quite fun. In the longer run, we have many ideas. One idea is maybe to create a certain apprenticeship scheme. We feel that our setup would be quite interesting for technical training in that green area, and that's something that we are working on at the moment. Back to the core of our idea, this designing and building in one hand. The question I'm mostly asked about is the question about the conflict of interest. How do you deal with that? And it is, of course, true that in the conventional process that has been solved. You have basically different entities. You have the designer and the contractor and the client, and they are nicely separated from each other with the idea of each one controlling the other one. On one hand, you can say it works quite well, especially, this is a good way of protecting the interest of a non-technical client, but the system is inherently based on adversity, and financial profit, earning money, is the only unifying binder between the parties, especially between the consultants and the contractors. And this is really, if you think of a creative process, if you see construction as a creative collaborative process, that's of course a pretty poor starting point for any such creativity to take place. The answer that we are giving to this question, how do you deal with the conflict of interest when the builders are the designers and the architect is the contractor and all those things? The answer is quite simple. It sounds quite naive, but sometimes the simple questions are also the truthful ones. It works with It's all about honesty. it is all about professionality. And it's also about having strong systems in place. I think one needs a very carefully assembled team for this, a very clear sense of purpose, a good amount of idealism, and probably strong leadership as well. I think the professional code of conduct is not some kind of document that you've once signed when you entered this profession, but it is actually in this kind of setup, it's something that is really needed every day. I remember on the 32 Degrees project where the architect in me had to condemn 40% of a wall that had been built during that week. You know, the builder in me cried, but the architect had no choice but to do what needed to be done. And that's of course important. These kind of conflicts will appear and they need to be tackled hand-on. Transparency is very important, explaining to the client such decisions and keeping a very open book in it. Strong systems are also really helpful. And one thing that we are doing is, while we are really encouraging the builders and the designers to be very, very close, we're actually discouraging that same closeness at management level. So the idea is that the senior management team of the construction arm is working independently like any other contractor would work, with systems in place, and you know, independent of any design decisions that may need to be taken. Lastly, and that cannot be over stated, this is not a system that works for everyone, and I think you need the right clients in this too. I think 32 Degrees and as well as Mustard Seed, our two first clients, are really prime examples for a client where this works. And I wouldn't want to say that this is a system that could apply to anywhere in the world or to any project. I do believe that overall, the risk of this conflict of interest is outweighed by the advantages of an integrated process. I think we are generally not talking enough about the process. This evening is really talking about the process because we are not talking enough about it. I think everybody got an idea of how complex such things are, and complexity is something very beautiful as well, and it needs to be celebrated. Of course, we are doing this with a group of artists at 30, or for a group of artists. And artists are actually people who know everything about process. Architects tend to be very sort of result-driven people. We like our nice buildings standing there, and we are not really we're not keen on ambiguity and process and failure and all such things. We are keen on getting it all done. Now, artists are actually experts in understanding the importance of the path versus getting there. So where, to me, it is important that we look at the process of designing and of building and of using the building eventually, that we look at this process as an integral part of it, and maybe as even the most important thing in it. And that is what our journey is all about. We don't think that you can do that credibly in this sort of adversarial, greed-driven attitude, but rather in a creative, collaborative way, the way we have worked together with Teesa's team and with James's team, and in the shared belief that you need to produce something of real value, and that is really an artistic approach to things. My assumption is that if you celebrate and value the how, the process, then of course there's also a very high built-in likelihood for the actual outcome, the building in the end, to also be, to be good and to be a success as well. But it is not sort of the primary driver behind it. Thank you very much.
Hi, Felix. I hope you can hear us.
Yes, I can.
All right. So I guess we can reach a round of applause. Thank you very much. I think one of the things that has stood out, at least for me, is the fact that many times we are in this adversarial kind of system where it's unified by financial gain. But if we work with honesty in a collaborative, creative process, then even the likelihood of the project or the product turning out great is much higher, as opposed to everyone just looking for a dime, looking to do it at every cost. So we are entering our session for questions and answers. I understand there are people that have sent in their questions on the chat, so we'll be getting into that. However, I would like to extend the opportunity to the people that are here in person, in case you have a question, a comment. Now is the time to engage with them. So, yeah. Maybe we start with the ones in the chat.
There were.
Maybe just to mention that we don't see you guys.
It's only on. We're trying to get it from the laptop to the webcam, and we were doing so well, you know.
No worries.
In the meantime, it's on this. That's the problem. I can do that. But in the meantime, I think we have a lot of questions in the chat. I don't want to move the laptop because the projector might. Okay, let's see. What do we have? What do we have? We have a lot of comments in the chat about the camera. We will share the recording afterwards. So someone asked about that. Okay, we have a question in the audience. So
yeah, I was just wondering, what about 32 Degrees inspired them to collaborate with you?
Oh, okay, so that's a good question for you too. What about us inspired you?
Yeah.
To collaborate?
I think the first time I came to visit, I just thought the mission of 32 to enable people to have this kind of freedom, this space to do contemporary art, you know, and to not have any of the things that might constrain them. I think it's such an important mission, particularly in Uganda, but I think in any context actually, that's what, you know, that's what the artists require, and it has such a bigger sort of significance and benefit to other people as well, and to like the community, and just to the way the rest of people think and feel as well. So I think it's just the mission of 32 is just so valuable that I was really drawn to it actually.
I think same here. Many architects, if you ask them what do you want your buildings to do, and then you would say, you know, I'd love my buildings to inspire people to do the right thing and to create a space in which the right thing can happen. And in a way, 32 East is exactly that as an organization. So it's perfectly suited to a collaborative experiment such as this.
Thank you.
So you can actually see something there. I was worried that it would be too dark, but you seem to have some lights. Great.
Maybe it's a 132 question, but I'm really curious about, you didn't already talk about it, how you guys collected the feedback from your community, because you have them over such a long period of time, and how much that impacted the design, and, you know, just what that process was like and what you were thinking about when you were doing it.
Okay, thanks for the great question, Nikki. I don't know if online, did you hear that question? Okay, great. Because I think James and Felix, you can also answer some of that.
Yeah, it was definitely a long process. I mean, I also joined when the process had begun. So when Roka, who was one of the founders of 32, had started thinking about a new home for the organization, there were already conversations with the community about what they would want to see. So some of the ideas, like even having a cafe, like what the space would constitute, already emerged from that time. And also like thinking about, okay, we want to have the studios, maybe cafe, a gathering space, and really again, what the space should feel like and what the values of the space should be. So really thinking about community being very important. Artists also, you would think that it's maybe like the organization to think about this, but artists really had a lot to say about what are the supportive structures within the center that can benefit my practice, not just in terms of the physical studio, like, okay, I want a space with lots of light, a space where, you know, I can store some of my things and like those practical things. But also, so many artists are really aware of what it means to be an artist in Uganda. And so they were really raising a lot of questions about, we want a space to show work, and we want a space to show work that is not commercially minded, so that we can show work that has more experimentation, that maybe doesn't immediately have a market value, and people get to see what's possible even in art making. And so that became really important, because ordinarily we might not have thought, okay, do we want a gallery? We're not a commercial space, but artists were like, this is essential. There aren't enough spaces to show, and there aren't enough spaces where we can show work that pushes boundaries that isn't necessarily going to have that easy marketability, right? And so also even thinking about, you know, this cafe, it's a gathering space for people, but also they're like, how are you guys going to make money? You know, how is this actually space going to run? So that feedback already started. And then James in 2016 when we had the first Artachat? Yeah. When James was still with Periscope and came with Daniel. And that was one of the first sessions where we invited, as always with all our programming, invited our community and said, you know, come through and speak to the architects. And this is the time where you get to say what you want to see. And what's really great about Artachat is it involves people from different sectors and different parts of society. So you can have artists, but you also have, like we had an IT person who was like, okay, because originally we were just gonna move the containers. And I think James, you had talked about greening like having earth on top of the containers, and you know, having like incorporating earth in that sense. And someone was like, the routers, they won't network. It's not gonna work, right? So to be able to get that input, I think was great, and you know, kind of set up a really nice environment for people to give feedback. And James was really great at hearing that and incorporating that. And I think, yeah, maybe you can talk about it more, James, and how to navigate that, because also sometimes it's so many voices. So how you balance.
Yeah. I think just to say that that particular, because you just kind of brought it back to me, the memory of that Artachat was one of the toughest presentations I've ever had to do, because some of the questions was like so they were so on the money, you know, they were like so good. Like that one you said, like really practical, really pragmatic, some of them. Others were about things that I wouldn't necessarily expect. The questions have come actually, like some were about the financing structures, and actually, is this the right way to spend the money? This is a lot of money, you know, is this the right thing to do in the first place? And kind of opening up all these kind of wider questions. And it was a really critical process actually, which was really good. It was really quite interesting. I think, and then there was another one I can't remember the last time I came, a couple of years ago as well, or a year before last, and we had another sort of workshop as well. And then I think also Teesa's been sort of taking the design over the years and kind of showing it to the kind of wider artist community as well, and kind of getting more specific feedback. So there is kind of, you know, I remember we had a conversation at one point about the design of the studios, and you know, that it's not just for, you know, when you might think of an artist as a sort of very traditional kind of painting and sort of, you know, big canvases and stuff like that, but then there might be an artist who's just doing everything on the computer. So the studio needs to kind of allow for that as well, that actually there's a desk space and there's just, you know, a completely different type of thing being made. Or there might be, you know, someone might be making something really, really big, three-dimensional, and where can they do that? And those sorts of conversations as well, kind of filtered through. Yeah.
Maybe not to forget that as we talk about the process, this is not the end of it, right? We are actually, what you guys are now seeing there on site is really, the project was phased, and phase 2 is actually significantly larger and more complex than phase 1, and Teesa has a really daring challenge ahead of her to try to fundraise the amount that's needed to continue building. But just to say that, yeah, what we're doing there right now is the first phase, and it will in itself create a space that 32 Degrees can use and can you know, will create some meaningful, you know, a meaningful working environment. But then there's, of course, there are much bigger plans that we hope to help you realize in the future.
Right. I think we're going to head to the questions in the Q&A section. Just a quick announcement for those that are physically here. There's a cold beer. For those that are online, we are sorry. Right. So one of the questions I see there is amazing work. Thanks again for sharing. This is to Felix. Could you share a bit on how your work might be informing an understanding of design and building standards in Uganda? So that's one. I don't know if you're comfortable with answering it straight up or I read all of them. Trouble is, will you remember by the time we finish all of them?
I think we could just go one by one, and if you could share it around if possible, I think that's fine. I don't know whether I can answer that question because it's maybe not the primary purpose of it. I don't even know. I said that in my bit. I'm not even sure that, you know, this is sort of the design and build is the answer. I'm just saying it's one approach. I like it. I enjoy it. We all enjoy it as an approach. And we are trying to run away from the term design and build, because design and build means something completely different in the real world. That's just a contractual arrangement where the designers are basically being novated to the contractor and they're being paid by the contractor instead of by the client. That is not what we mean by design and build. That's why I keep talking about either the master builder approach or the Baumeister approach, as I called it this evening. Sort of the idea that it's all like an end-to-end thing, and the design team and the construction team are basically the same from the beginning to the end. To what extent can we inform? I don't know. I guess by doing what we're doing, we may create an example of what can be done, and then maybe other people find that interesting, and maybe other people do something similar. And if that happens, it's great. And that is why we are so interested in sharing what we are learning. So it's not about today's event. Also, the idea was not about just, you know, basically showing results of the work. The idea was actually more trying to talk about why, how, you know, where the tricky bits, where are the potentials and such things. And we are going to continue to do that. And then if there are people who can, you know, who get inspired by it, who learn from it, that's brilliant. That's exactly the idea. It's an open source sort of approach. Everybody learns, and while you learn, you let other people take part in that learning exercise. And you know, if they get better, great. If they get better than yourself, even better.
All right. Thank you, Felix. I guess that answers it. The second question is still directed to you. And it says, Felix, I might have missed this, but do you see academia fitting within this collaborative effort? That's from Matthew Ngango.
I do. And especially on that research side. It's something that we always had in mind, that we do want to become more academic. And I think our working setup could also be interesting for more academically minded people, doing research, but doing it sort of doing case studies, for instance, on actual builds projects or on actual design projects. So definitely we are open. Localworks is still a very young initiative, so there's lots of things that we haven't yet managed to start and to build up, but we are all aware that maybe on the research side, there's still the biggest potential for growth and for improvement. So definitely we would be very interested to collaborate also with more academically minded institutions and see what can be done.
Right. We have a question to James and Felix. Could you also talk a bit more about the need to work with the right clients? I imagine it's an important part of your approach that could be a huge learning as well.
Yeah, I think I only learned, I think, as I got a bit more experience as an architect, that you need to choose your clients and you need to choose your projects. You know, that it's not that you just they just turn up. You actually need to find the right clients that you share values with, or else you're constantly kind of fighting against it, and you never kind of it's not an enjoyable process, but you never get the results that you want, and it's really difficult. And I think in Teesa and 32 and the mission, but I think Teesa specifically really shares the values that we share. And Localworks as well, there's this shared environmental values particularly, and I think the sort of shared ethos in the kind of exchange and the collaboration that this project wouldn't work without that. It wouldn't happen. Yeah.
And imagine if this whole idea of doing this as a collaborative process did not include the client and the user. I mean, it would be absolutely meaningless. Absolutely meaningless. We are building for the users, so we have to design with them. And I agree with what James said. You select your clients in the way, but you should also not forget the clients also select you, and you come together, and then you form a real team. So it is not like you're delivering something for somebody who eventually pays some invoice or something, but no, you're actually going through the process together with all the hiccups. I think Teesa could also share some of that because it's not a straightforward process. It's a process where, and she suffers in meetings where Teesa now knows everything about compressed earth and moisture protection and working space on a site. And I actually listened once to Teesa taking people around the site, and she's basically technically entirely proficient with earth construction, and she knows everything about lime and stuff because she's involved in it and because she's engaged in it. So that's the best you can get. I think we should also not underestimate, especially with this you can say unconventional type of procurement, how important the element of trust is in all this. Trust is not being recognized as the currency, but it is actually the currency in this sort of way of working. You cannot work in this way if you do not trust each other. If you think the other guy is about to screw you, then this will not work. Then go back to the other system where everything is on money and contracts and guarantees and all this stuff. In this process, there are no guarantees. And there is only personal trust from one party in the other, and the commitment that you're not going to disappoint each other. That's super important. Teesa, I think you should say something about the role of the client as well.
Oh, gosh, I don't know what I can say that's not what you've already outlined. So for us, I guess one thing I can say is that because we are a nonprofit and we've been fundraising for this for a long time, and thank you, Felix, for mentioning we are still fundraising. When it came to working with Localworks, even in speaking with the board, there was a lot of conversation about expense, like the cost of working with Localworks, because they are more affordable contractors or more affordable ways of doing things. Those are turnkey offers, what meant that, we usually with contracting, you put out bids or invite people to bid for the project, and we decided we weren't going to do that. It really was a trust thing because, and we talked about costs while doing the site tour, like what are costs when you really think about it, right? Because if you're trying to save money on who is building your building, you are going to spend a lot of money in the long run. One, like it's literally a building. So if it falls on someone's head and they sue you, that is a lot of money, right? Like there's the safety element of it. And then also it again is really thinking about who is it that we can trust with, an artist, I didn't say this, but an artist was like, this is your baby, like, like this is actually something that we put so much of ourselves into, and who do we trust to hold that and to see it through and in ways that we wouldn't even imagine, right? And so I think, for us, then when we thought about all these things, it made the most sense to work with Localworks and spend that. And again, it's maybe taking longer, like there's more fundraising to do, but in the long run, it's completely worth it. And even to be hosting this, right? Like how many, actually, to be on site, right? Like as clients, we are literally sharing the site with our contractors during the building. And I think that some contractors would have been like, maybe no, like maybe let's not do that. That isn't gonna work. We're always bringing visitors over. We're always like, knocking on the door, seeing who's in the site office. I don't know how many times I've asked Joffrey to like have an impromptu video to talk to our audience on Instagram. And that is also really about a partnership. I mean, like James and I have had talks in other events. And again, like if you don't have trust in a relationship, then none of that would be possible. And again, like the impact of the project, I think would be isolated to just us, just now, rather than it being this thing that we can share with other people.
Great. There's a question from, okay.
Quite a few years. I'm just curious how, as all kind of creative entities, we work together during that 2 to 8 years, I don't know, that process, and how I'm sure priorities shifted during that time, and how, as I guess, needs of each of kind of the different entities have filtered into that process, and how that has kind of worked. In terms of from, a design perspective, the client perspective of, our priorities have shifted, this is what we want, we've been able to do X, Y, and Z over the last few years. How you guys have kind of found you're working together with that?
Yeah, maybe I'll start and then you can pitch in, James and Felix. Yeah, right, it has been many years, and I think maybe even going back to the trust thing, James is friends with Rocker, right? So I didn't have that relationship with James. Like it took us time to figure out how we work together, how we communicate. We've had to communicate on email a lot, and our tones on email are different. And there've actually been times where we've had to be like, okay, when you said that, it came across this way, right? Like, like there actually have been moments that haven't been that easy. And I mean, like even James, the entity is different, right? Like we first started working when James was running Periscope and now has a whole new company. And so I think the scope has changed, the land that we use has changed in so many ways. And I think maybe a big answer to that is that we all are flexible and acknowledge that change happens, and we can't let that be a frustration. Like it is just the nature of things. And I think both all of us, I think, have been really understanding of that. And I mean, like money stuff, like there've been difficult moments, and I think there's just been a level of commitment that's kind of been like, we're in it. It might take a really long time. I mean, I think also as architects, you probably design for projects that have never happened, right? And so also having that be a part of the way you work. So I think a lot of patients on their side as well with us of being like, oh, okay, it's changed again, okay. Okay, you're not starting construction, okay. Okay, oh my gosh, like, you know, like you have to be patient and you have to figure out if you can't adapt to change, then it will make you. So you kind of have to be at peace with that if you want to enjoy the work you're doing. Otherwise, like the change will happen. So, yeah, I don't know what you think.
I didn't quite get the question, but I think I understand the gist from your answer, actually, Teesa. I think, yeah, you know, when you work together for so many years, there are always going to be like ups and downs, and I think you do. It does take a while as well to establish a relationship and how you work together, and that trust is not something that just comes from the beginning. You know, the trust sort of builds up over time. I think it does come down to that sense of sharing the same, you know, ultimately the same kind of end goal, I think, or the sort of vision for the project or the values of the project, that you share them, and then, you know, you kind of work in partnership, and sometimes you might make a mistake and you have to fess up to it, and sometimes the other person might, you know, make a mistake, and yeah, it's sort of being professional and yeah, and flexible, I guess, as Teesa said. Yeah.
Maybe that's something that we can learn from this evening, that collaboration means adaptability, as in needs adaptability. And I think it's something that you learn. You collaborate probably in the best way. You adapt to each other, you adapt requirements to all these things. And actually, that's something that I really admire about how James leads this process, because in the end, the design architect leads the process, and you've been incredibly adaptable to so many things. Whether they come from Teesa, whether they come from us, or from, I don't know, KCTA or whatever there has been, you manage to adapt. And adapting does not mean sort of, you know, going with the wind and everything does it itself. It means guiding it in the right way. It's a bit like when you give your child to school, you select the school carefully, but in the end you entrust other people with taking on the education of your child. And a little bit like that is when you give away your architectural design and you give it to another architect and engineers and say, like, you now do the detailing. And it requires a lot of, you know, trusting it, and it requires a lot of faith in it. And then you also guide the process in the right way. And I think you've really done a great job in giving us freedom, but the same amount of, you know, at the same time also guiding us and stopping us and selecting. We often gave you alternatives and say we could either do this or that, and then at that point you were always very clear in which direction you wanted to go. So I would say being adaptable does not mean you know, sort of giving up on the big thinking. Quite the opposite. Stick to the big idea behind it, but be very, very flexible in how you get there. And it's maybe a good example for that.
Right, great. I think this is going to be the very last round of questions. I hope they're about 2, after which we shall have, I guess, a parting word from each one. The rest of the questions, we have a newsletter, so we can always get those questions answered, and that we always send out to everyone that's subscribed, registered for this event, essentially. So let me see. Okay, so Lawrence Okoth asks, at the previous question on standards, I think he's referring to the one that he had asked to Felix about setting a kind of standard. He didn't mean design and build standards, rather design standards as well as building standards. For some reason, maybe you may want to address that, but I feel like still in a way you sort of touched on that.
I think I would request that Lawrence contacts me and asks specifically the question. I've tried to answer as good as I could, but I'm not entirely sure I get the answer.
I think perhaps it's about the sort of regulations, you know, is the work that we're doing in Uganda actually impacting on, you know, the rammed earth regulations. And I remember we had a conversation with KCCA about, you know, actually what's the, how are they determining whether this is going to be a safe building, or, you know, those sorts of things.
So one maybe quite quickly, yes, initially when we were involved in the project for the pediatric hospital in Entebbe, which was even where the government is even a stakeholder in this, the first thing they said is, we've never heard of this thing that you can build with earth. We need to do material testing, and we need to develop standards for it. And then we managed to convince them that we can use standards from elsewhere. There are very, very detailed, very, very good standards for rammed earth from New Zealand, actually, because New Zealand has quite a long history working with rammed earth. And we reminded them that for very many other more conventional materials, the government of Uganda is very happy to import specifications from other countries. It's not like that's all been done here. And once we submitted them those standards and they looked through them, they were quite confident. They said, okay, let's go ahead. And now with 32 degrees, we could actually build on that. We could actually say to KCCA, listen, Ministry of Works have reviewed this. They're happy with it. Look, at government has even built a building like that. So I think that gave them confidence together, however, with very detailed engineering submissions. So it's not like we just got this approved. We needed to convince KCCA that we know what we're doing and that this is all founded on proper engineering. Yes, there is a lot of experimentation, but the experimentation is not being done sort of on a guess. It's done with proper engineering behind it and proper science behind it.
All right. The other question was still from Lawrence at Teesa. You probably mentioned a bit about this, but how do you imagine the Art Center would influence more originality among artists? No gorilla paintings just because they sell.
Thanks for the question. Yeah, I think a big thing with that is there's something really powerful about seeing lived examples and seeing what's possible. I think with this space, so much of what we're trying to do, and even what we have done, right, building on what we've done, is really opening up and demystifying what it means to be a living artist in the city, in this country. So that means, you know, creating lots of moments for artists to get to meet each other. Even now, like, we are a shared workspace, so on any day during the week, artists can come through and meet different people from lots of different backgrounds and learn more about what their practice is, what they do, how they do it, and just like creating this really open environment where people can learn from each other. With the physical space that we're building, you know, with the studios, we have open studio sessions. So at the end of a residency, artists open up their studio and show, like, this is what I've been doing. This is who I am as an artist. These are the things I'm thinking about. This is the material I'm working with. And so if you only thought art was one thing, you're exposed to so many new ways of making art. So that's, you know, within the studio, we'll have workshop space as well. So in terms of the production, there'll be lots of opportunities for artists to get to learn from other artists. And then also as an audience, you know, with the cafe, for example, until we build the gallery in phase 2, we'll also be able to show work, right? So again, showing work where you might never see it in a market, you might never see it in a gallery, a commercial gallery, but you get to see it here. And you get to see it in a space that welcomes you and doesn't say, you're not cool enough, you don't know, you know, art speak, you don't know, there are many things I don't know, so I can't come up with an example. But, you know, like really having a space that everyone feels like they can just walk into and see art. Like when I think about, you know, where my interest in art started, it's because I got to see it, right? And experience it and have those moments where I'm like, whoa, like my brain didn't even know it could think that way, right? So really creating as many of those moments as possible for as many people as possible within the city.
Great. I think this is going to be the very last one in the interest of time.
Maybe
One online and one from here.
Okay, so one online, then one here. One from Florence Niger. She says, is the choice of materials entirely dependent on availability and transport factors, or is it about aesthetics and the client? Yes. So what informs the choice of materials?
Who is asked?
Shall I go first? The choice of earth, I think, it was almost, I don't want to use the phrase no-brainer, but I'm going to use it. It felt like a no-brainer because it's like this material is there on the site. It's like, why wouldn't you use it? It's already, yeah, it's like so available. And it has so many amazing other qualities. I mean, yes, to the aesthetics, like aesthetically, personally, I really like it, and sort of the textural qualities of it as well, but also the performance of it, you know, as the thermal mass, and the fact that actually it's really great in a very hot climate because it helps to cool the building, and also it's so available. And you know, when I saw the construction of the earth blocks as well for the first time, and understanding as an architect how much embodied energy goes into making a brick usually, because of the firing process of a brick, and also seeing, you know, I remember when the first time I came to Kampala and seeing roadside bricks and seeing literally the deforestation, you know, massive, really mature trees being kind of ripped out to put in these kilns to fire the bricks by the side of the road, creating deforestation, creating flooding issues, creating all sorts of other issues. And I saw the compressed earth bricks. It's like, well, that's obvious. We have to make a building out of that. You know, there's no other choice. Why would we do it any other way, kind of thing?
Okay, I guess that answers it. We have a question from here.
Yeah. Okay, so I was wondering, you've talked, both of you, and Teesa as well. Felix mentioned that he learned from 32 degrees, like about adaptability. And James also mentioned in his talk things that he has learned from this project. Because often when you're working, I don't know, in post-colonial context in the global south, you're normally expected to have learned something external. James says that he learned something from here that he's taking to his practice in the UK. So I was wondering if he could expand on that. What exactly did he learn here that he feels that he can take there?
Yeah, I mean, also it's like, how can I put this? It's like it's a very different kind of regulatory context, and you know, this kind of form of collaboration is quite different in a way as well. So there's and in a way more enjoyable, perhaps I might say, because there's kind of different barriers that, you know, that you have in Europe. It's one of the most highly regulated kind of places to work as an architect in the world. And then there's things about, as obviously kind of very pragmatic things I've learned about how all the technical stuff about how you make round earth buildings and all the rest of it. But I think probably the most kind of important thing is seeing the kind of freedom that Localworks operate in, and the freedom in the way they, and I mean that in the sort of the best possible way, really, that they allow themselves to be architects, contractors, engineers, even cost, you know, everything kind of comes together, and it's an incredibly freeing, creative process that doesn't, you know, it does happen. There are architects that do it in the UK, but not in the same way. And I think that's something really interesting, that actually is a kind of model. You can't just translate it into the UK, of course you can't, but as a kind of model of a way to work, I think is really, really interesting. I think that's something I kind of fascinates me, actually. Yeah.
Wow. All right. Thank you all. Thank you to all the people that have spoken, those that have asked questions, those that have sent in comments. We're going to have a concluding remark from each speaker. I think we'll start with Teesa in the order that they spoke, unless there's
No, I'll end.
All right. So okay. So I guess we'll start with you, James, then Felix, and then Teesa.
I'd just like to say thank you for inviting me. I've found this really, really enjoyable, and I'm really sad not to be there in person, and I hope to come soon. Yeah, but thank you.
You're very welcome.
I emphasize that as well. Thank you, everybody. I think the fact that so many people are interested, both in the in the technical side of this type of construction, but then also in the way how it's done, is something that I value a lot, and I'm really excited about a certain group of people that keeps coming back to these local talks events, and that show interest. And I hope that, and I know that many things will come out of that. This is a network, and this is a group of people, and they're not only in Uganda. That grows and grows and grows, and it's wonderful to be part of it. And I'm looking forward to seeing all of you on the 15th of September when the next Local Talks event will happen. I can't remember what the topic is, but I'm sure it's also interesting. So see you then, and thanks a lot.
Yeah, I think really a big part is just gratitude for how far we've gotten. Like literally since 2016, I've been working on this, and to be sitting in this space right now, yeah, it just feels like a really great moment, and it is so much thanks to everyone who's been involved. And I think also for me, just having had the opportunity to learn so much, and I think, yeah, just an encouragement to everyone as well about how, at least for me, like when I think about this project and what it means, it is about building the future that I want to see, right? Like I think there's been so much about living in these times that can really weigh you down, where it really feels like nothing is working. Everything's falling apart in all these different ways. And so to get to work on a space with such fantastic people who believe in the same things and want to see the same things and want to do that in community, I think has been so encouraging. So to say that is possible. And to thank you, because you are a part of this now. Some of you have been in this process with us from the beginning, so thank you for that. And thank you for the future that we're building together. So really, thank you for coming. Thank you for being a part of this, and we'll see you in this space.
All right. See you all. Thank you for coming.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.